turn it over to Professor Julia Lupton to teach us about Psalms and Shakespeare, or Shakespeare and Psalms.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and then make some comments. And so can people see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, fantastic. Well, first of all, I just want to, it's really just been such an honor and a joy to be welcomed into the study group in the final months of your work. I don't know what I'm going to do when it's over. I know a lot of people are feeling that, but it's really been very meaningful. And I believe that Rabbi Spitz is also here. I studied Psalms with Rabbi Spitz first in Tustin, California.
Oh, wow.
And then
Welcome.
he advised me to start studying with Rabbi Kleinbaum and the rest of you here. So it's been really so amazing. And then for today's presentation, I've been blessed to partner with Stephen Dean, who's recorded a performance of a speech from The Tempest for us, and also with 3 other members of the group who have agreed to read passages. So the first question is, what did the Psalms mean to Shakespeare, and what version or versions of the Psalms would he have read? Because there were many, many available during the 16th and 17th centuries. With the advent of the English Reformation and its new emphasis on reading the Bible in the vernacular rather than in Latin, as it had been done for centuries among Christians, there was a huge renaissance of Psalms translations. And some of these were official enterprises, which were to be included in the new Reformed Bibles. And others were designed for singing in church or at home. And still others were literary experiments that were really for personal use. The Book of Psalms, which is also referred to in Christian usage as the Psalter, was included in the Book of Common Prayer. You can think of as the Siddur and Oxor in church. And this is the title of the 17th century edition. You can have
You're breaking up a little. Is your internet connection okay?
Oh gosh, I hope so.
Sometimes if you turn off your video, not the
just do audio.
Okay, I'll try that.
That might help. Just turn off stop video on the bottom. Oh no, is she frozen? Julia, you now seem to be frozen. And she's gone. Let's hope she comes right back. Oh, fascinating already.
I know, I'm on the edge of my seat.
The edge of my seat.
Excited.
It always happens at the worst time.
Who distributed that great article about Psalm 51 and Shakespeare? Somebody sent out, Harold?
I distributed it, but it had been sent to me by someone else. And I'm trying to think.
That is really a
sent it.
I started it.
Oh, okay.
Article in the Shakespeare Quarterly, and then you found. I tried to fax it to you to distribute, but you found an actual copy to download.
Yes.
From one of your friends.
Friend of mine who was at a university and was able to go on whatever that.
Yeah, that's a really, really fascinating article.
Fascinating article.
So Marcia Melnick is asking who's speaking. You mean besides me? I mean, who's talking about Shakespeare?
No, who just spoke? Who said they distributed the piece? Or
I did. It was I sent it out via email to everybody.
oh no, I know. Okay, somebody
Harold,
else.
can you put the link in the? Do you have the link to put in chat now?
No.
It's a long article.
Right.
It's really interesting about Psalm 51 and Hamlet.
But if you check your email, it went to everybody. Oh, poor Marilyn. Okay. So let's
It was I who originated the issue when I read my Shakespeare Quarterly, and I referred the article to this class when I brought it up one day how Psalm 51 was related to Hamlet, and
Polonius.
And it was Claudius who was praying. But anyway, after I recommended it, Rabbi said she really wanted to see it, and I could not fax it. So Harold was able to get a copy.
That's how it happened. Yeah, I actually just read it, guess in recent days. I didn't read it when I first got it. It's fantastic. Yep. All right, Julia is now
I'm
back.
back. I set up a hotspot on my phone.
Okay,
So
good.
hopefully that will be stable.
We're also so agile with this. Welcome back, Julia.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to share
No
screen.
worries. We all know what that feeling is like.
Oh my goodness, but not today, especially with so many people participating. Okay, so you can see my screen again. Okay, so I was on this title page of the Book of Common Prayer, and you can see that at the center of it is the Psalter or Psalms of David. So it's really interesting that in these prayer books that were printed in thousands of copies during Shakespeare's lifetime, they included the entire Psalter. Now, why is that? It's because the faithful were expected to read all the Psalms once a month, which is really quite an extraordinary undertaking. And so here you see, this is the opening page of a Psalter in a Book of Common Prayer printed during Shakespeare's lifetime. And you see that it has a schedule here for the Psalms that you're going to read in the morning and in the evening. It also refers to the translation. In this case, it's the translation by Matthew Coverdale. And you'll see that it's translated in prose, but typeset as lines of verse, which is a wonderful compromise. And that also includes the title of each psalm, which are the opening words in Latin, not in Hebrew, because Coverdale was not actually translating from the Hebrew language. So the Psalms are easily the most familiar part of the Bible to English people of Shakespeare's time, and they were readily available for reading, for praying, for singing, and meditation. And the Psalms were also considered to be literary, with literature itself as a new concept in the Renaissance. And it's really fascinating to me that women as well as men sometimes translated Psalms.
Oh no, Julia, you're frozen again. Julia, that's better. If you press stop video on the bottom.
I stopped my video.
Okay, now let's try it. Good.
Oh, let's
We
hope.
hear you good. We hear you fine.
It says my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully this will be okay. So Anne Locke's A Meditation of a Penitent Sinner is the first sonnet sequence in English, and it includes 21 sonnets, all of which are paraphrasing and expanding on Psalm 51. And you can still hear me? Yes?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, all right, I'm just done now. It's such a strange tunnel, this Zoom thing. And as you know, the penitential Psalms, there are 7 of them, have their own special history in medieval and Renaissance art, literature, and liturgy. They were read as both a guide to penitence and as a kind of novel, dramatizing the spiritual journey of David, as we have seen and experienced and debated in this class. And one thing that interests me about Anne Locke is the deep early connection between Psalms and sonnets, and not only in Shakespeare. The 2 words were often presented as antonyms, since the sonnet is erotic and secular, and the psalm is sacred and divine, but also as synonyms. Both are lyric poems that share introspective themes, internal dialogue, and also those formal turns that we've talked about. Mary Sidney Herbert also translated the Psalms into many metrical forms, including sonnets, with her brother, Sir Philip Sidney, and they compared themselves to Moses and Miriam. This is a presentation copy of their Psalter for Queen Elizabeth, and you can see how beautiful the calligraphy is. That's Psalm 40. And the collection is prefaced by a wonderful poem by John Donne about the psalm as a literary form. And so what I love about these examples is that these women in the 16th century were doing what we're doing now, right? They were writing their own psalms in their own language, using the many creative means at their disposal. So at CBST, we're part of a really long tradition. So what about Shakespeare and Psalms? Well, needless to say, because the Psalms are everywhere in the culture, they're everywhere in Shakespeare. You had a chance to read the piece on Hamlet, Claudius, and Psalm 51. And there's countless allusions to the Psalms because so many phrases and images are shared by these two bodies of work. Stephen and I decided to focus on The Tempest, which I call Shakespeare's Psalter. The theme and imagery of tempest, storm, and sea, along with an undersong of beneficent rain and fresh springs, runs through the play. And also psalmic are the play's basic actions, which include benediction, thanksgiving, and the seeking and receiving of forgiveness. In the Psalms, there are many references to storms and tempests, which are signs of God's strength and fury, and also metaphors for suffering and despair. But there aren't that many references to ships. And an exception is Psalm 107. And this is from the Miles Coverdale translation from the Book of Common Prayer. And Jeremy has agreed to read these lines for us. And I believe I saw Jeremy check in today. So I'm hoping he will unmute and share these lines from this psalm with us.
Okay. They that go down to the sea in ships and occupy their business in great waters, these men see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. For at his word the stormy wind ariseth, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They are carried up to heaven and down again to the deep. Their soul melteth away because of the trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man and are at their wits' end. So when they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, he delivereth them out of their distress. For he maketh the storm to cease, so that the waves thereof are still. Then they are glad because they are at rest. And so he bringeth them unto the haven where they would be.
That was beautiful, Jeremy. Thank you. So I'm really struck by the drama of this psalm, its intense naturalism. We feel that we are on a ship that is tossed high and dragged low by the high waves, and that we are staggering like drunkards, trying to retain our balance on this careening vessel. I'm also really struck by the compressed dramatic narrative of the passage. Did you see how it goes from going down to the sea, to finding oneself in a storm, to asking and receiving deliverance and returning to safe harbor? It's the arc of Homer's Odyssey in just a few lines. And it's also the arc of Shakespeare's Tempest, which, like the Psalms and unlike Homer, adds forgiveness and reconciliation into the mix. Psalm 107 is called the Pilgrim's Psalm because the pilgrims aboard the Mayflower read it as addressed especially to them. And on December 11th, 1620, when they arrived at Plymouth, Governor Bradford addressed them with words from this psalm. The Tempest, which was published in 1611, was inspired by another group of colonists who were shipwrecked off the coast of the Bermudas in 1609. And I'm guessing that those colonists also turned to Psalm 107 for its astonishing choreography of shipwreck and survival. And here's the opening of The Tempest, which begins in the middle of a raging storm, with actors staggering on and off stage as they struggle to keep their balance in the energy of the storm. Bosun, here, master, what cheer? Good, speak to the mariners, fall to it yarely, or we run ourselves aground. Bestir, bestir. The actors circle on and off stage, zoning the stage as a ship and using rapid call and response to create a sense of urgency. And they too may stagger like drunkards to communicate the capsizing vessel. Miranda, the daughter of the exiled magician Prospero, views this storm from the shore, and she addresses her father as a kind of magician god. If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them. The sky, it seems, would pour down stinking pitch, but that the sea, mounting on the welkin's cheek, dashes the fire out. Miranda's name means wonder, and she's describing the power of the tempest, the wonder of the deep, and her father's quasi-divine art, his capacity to both rouse and calm the seas. Like Psalm 107, Shakespeare depicts storm and shipwreck within a framework of cosmic power and the possibility of forgiveness. And I think Shakespeare also shares the psalmist's sense that music and song are instruments for exploring a landscape of climate extremes, which are also emotional intensities and meditative exercises. Prospero is the magician who conjures the storm and the tempest, and he echoes images of God as a sublime creator who brought earth, sea, and sky into existence and who clothes himself in storm clouds. I love Psalm 18. He made darkness his secret place, his pavilion around about him, with dark water and thick clouds to cover him, like Prospero's magic robe. And Psalm 29 evokes the power of the sea, but also the earthquakes that make the wilderness tremble and that breaketh the cedar trees. Other psalms emphasize the music of the sea. Psalm 96, let the heavens rejoice, and let the earth be glad. Let the sea make a noise, and all that therein is. And in Psalm 33, the sea is a place where God collects precious and beautiful things. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as it were upon a heap, and layeth up the deep as in a treasure house. So what Shakespeare draws from these psalms is respect for the immense power of the sea, and he associates this power with God as creator of heaven and earth, but also with the stories of the flood and of Exodus. In these liquid lyrics, there's fear and anxiety, even despair, but also wonder at the majesty of God's works. At times, the seas make music that the psalmist accesses through the receptivity of their soul, their living being or nephesh, aided by that focusing instrument of poetry. And although the sea is overwhelming, as it was for Jonah, the postures of trust and thanksgiving glimmer through the crusting waves. And we see all of this in the most famous song in the poem, which I'm renaming a Psalm for Ariel. And Sherry has agreed to read this for us.
Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell. Hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell. Hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell. Hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell. Hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell.
Wow. Thank you, Sherry. That was so beautiful. So I hope you could hear the psalmic elements there in Ariel's song. It draws on the Psalms of deliverance from real and psychic drowning. It also practices that environmental attunement through the tools of music and prayer. And the ravenous sea morphs into a wondrous treasure house where eyes become pearls and bones become coral. There are echoes here of Jonah's Psalm of Thanksgiving, but it's also a free creation on Shakespeare's part, a psalm all his own. And thank you so much, Sherry, for putting it to music as well. That was really, I'm just amazed.
Well, actually, you don't know, but my husband Simon is a flutist, so he was my accompaniment.
Well, thank you, Simon and Sherry. That's really great.
Thank you.
So Caliban, the creature whom Prospero has enslaved on the island, also gets to compose his own beautiful psalm. Ariel has been leading the drunken sailors Trinculo and Stefano astray with weird music, but Caliban is able to hear something different in that sound. And we asked Jack to read Caliban's speech for us, and he is in Paris, and he actually shared a recording. So hopefully this will work out well.
Be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I then had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, the clouds, methought, would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again.
So that's Jack at the Eiffel Tower. So where are some psalm elements there? Well, the image of a fructifying rain runs through the Psalms as a counter melody to the theme of storms. Psalm 72, he shall come down like the rain into a fleece of wool, even as the drops that water the earth. Or Psalm 87, which is explicitly referred to in relationship to Caliban earlier in the play, all my fresh springs shall be in thee. I also hear links here with Psalm 67, which is sometimes referred to as the menorah psalm. According to the Zohar, David composed this psalm after the wind blew his lyre in the night. In classical musical theory, this is called the Aeolian harp, after the Greek god of winds, Aeolus. And so too, Caliban hears the natural music of the isle as he sleeps, and then he translates it into poetry, a poetry of remembrance and benediction when he wakes up. So what about Prospero and the Psalms? Well, Prospero styles himself as a god of storms, but he must learn how to practice forgiveness and accept his own humanity as creature and not as creator. And Stephen has been doing some remarkable work with this character. We actually started dialoguing about the Tempest before we began planning this presentation. And in this short video, Stephen's Manhattan apartment kind of miraculously becomes Prospero's desert island. And Stephen, of course, himself becomes Prospero. Act 5, Scene 1 opens with Prospero and the spirit Ariel deep in discussion. Prospero has captured his betrayers using his godlike powers and magic charms, and they are now suspended in a trance-like state someplace else on the island. We, the audience, are awaiting Prospero's next move. Ariel expresses feelings of empathy for the captured human beings, and he says to Prospero, if you now beheld them, your attentions would become tender. And this is Prospero's response to Ariel.
Hast thou which art but air, a touch, a feeling of their afflictions? And shall not myself, one of their kind that relish all as sharply passion as they be kindly moved than thou art? Though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick, yet with my nobler reason gainst my fury do I take part. The rarer action is in virtue. and in vengeance, they, being penitent, the sole drift of my purpose, doth extend not a frown further. Go. Release them, Ariel. My charms I'll break. Their senses I'll restore, and they shall be themselves. Go fetch them, Ariel. Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sand with prickless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune and do fly him when he comes back. You demi puppets that by moonshine do the green sour ringlets make, whereof the ewe not bites, and you whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms that rejoice to hear the solemn curfew, by whose aid weak masters, though ye be, I have the noontide sun called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea with the azured vault set roaring war to the death-rattling thunder. And have I given fire and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt? The strong-based promontory have I made shake, and by the spurs pluck up the pine and cedar graves. At my command have waked their sleepers open, and let them forth by my so potent art. But this rough magic I here abjure. The righteous bloom like the date palm. They prosper like the cedars of Lebanon. Tashlik bim zut lot yam kolcha totam. I'll break my staff, bury it, certain fathom in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound. I'll drown my book.
So that is the end of our presentation. And I want to thank Stephen and everyone else who contributed readings. And
Wow. Wow, Julia, that was fantastic. And thank you to all who actually brought Shakespeare to life that way. As we know, it's really meant to be experienced that way. But Julia, what a great background. So shall we have questions and discussions?
Absolutely. I'd love for Stephen to have a chance to say a little bit about what he means by the Kabbalah of forgiveness as part of this, but we're really interested to hear from everyone what your, further questions are about, Shakespeare and the Psalms as well, and whatever you want to talk about. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming together and making it a collective experience. It's really fun to work with people.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Julia and Sherry and Jack in and Jeremy, and this thing really came together exciting. Of course, thank you, Rabbi Kleinbaum, and everybody else here in this group. I'll talk really fast because we've got a lot of stuff to do. So basically, I started working on Prospero. It was out of the Psalms because I really did want to, after I did Psalm 23, and I learned that, and I did it as a contemporary monologue, it inspired me to go look at other classical material like Shakespeare, and I don't have much classical experience. So I decided to work on Prospero. I never thought I would get to do it to the group. It was, my own personal work. And then by chance, I have actually spoke to Julia about my work on it, and she invited me to join her on this. And it's just been a wonderful experience, and everybody else came into it. So anyway, while I was working on it, I got started because I was excited because Prospero picks up trees and does crazy stuff like that. But as I got working, I discovered Psalm 92, and Rabbi Moskowitz was teaching the class, and Hazan Hirsch put in the chat the Tomer Devorah, which is the 13 attributes of forgiveness written by, the thesis written by a Spanish Sephardic Kabbalist by the name of Cordoba. And basically, it is 13 reasons why the Creator, why the divine forgives human beings. And the point is that human beings have to imitate, we've heard Rabbi Kleinbaum say this so many times, the divine, and that's our job on earth. And I just used that as the background and made a correlation that Mr. Shakespeare himself was connected to the work of Moises Cordoba because of Menachem Azaria di Fano, who was born in 1548 and died in 1616, and he promoted Cordoba's work, and he died the same year that Shakespeare died. So I just think that all those intellectuals got together on the internet and they were discussing all of this stuff, and it inspired Shakespeare when he was writing it. Basically, as an actor, you have to fill yourself up with, embody something that's personal to you. And this became very personal to me because of the own forgiveness that I've had to go through during the month of Elul and the work that we all have been doing. And it all came together, and I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you, everybody.
One of the things, Stephen, that you brought out, as did Sherry and the others who participated, Jeremy and Jack from Paris, is that something that Julia clearly understands so deeply is that Shakespeare, like the Psalms, are not meant to be just words on a page. And it's very easy, especially looking at old texts, to imagine, kind of like looking at a black and white photograph. It's very two-dimensional. It's very stuck on a page. And by your bringing it out like this, you're really showing honestly what's true about the Psalms too. They were meant to be sung, and we can imagine, although we have to work a lot harder because it's even farther in the past, that these are not meant to just sit on flat on a page. And so that's a beautiful way to remind us. And Julia, you should know it's a very Jewish custom to read the entire book of Psalms every month.
Oh, wow.
There are
not so long.
It is a psalm. There's a whole concept of a Tehillim group that people do it together. And you can find them. Those groups actually exist on the internet now as well. But they're Tehillim groups where people, kind of like a meditation, people keep themselves accountable to keep doing it every day. And there are different structures for doing it, but it's a very Jewish concept, especially, I would say, I'm not sure if Rabbi Moskowitz would agree with me, among women, but men do it also.
That's so fascinating.
If you go to the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and you'll see groups of women standing there. They're doing the services, but to themselves, but more likely than, because the service, it only takes so long to pray through a service. Honestly, it can't take that long. What they're doing most of the time when they're there is reciting the book of Psalms. And so reciting Tehillim in different structures and taking it on to say it all for a week, to do it in a week, or to do all 150 in a day. There's all different structures for doing it, but a month recitation of the Psalms is actually quite common
That's fascinating. So the Book of Common Prayer, which in turn
That's
is
so
building on
interesting.
Catholic liturgies, is really building on, is indeed
So
building on.
when was the Book of Common Prayer published?
Well, I mean, there's various editions, but the first one is around 1540, I think. I have my edition of it somewhere.
I think one of our members actually has, I'm not sure if it's original, but it's certainly from, it's I was once at his house and he showed me. I'm going to get in touch with him to find out what iteration.
1549. The first one is 1549.
So
and then
one of
there
them-
are major
one of the old
revisions
ones.
every 20
Uh-huh.
years or so.
All right, I'm going to find out exactly which one he has, because he has one edition that's obvious, pre-modern edition of it. Wow, that is so exciting. And would that have been the Psalter then that the Pilgrims brought?
Well, of course, the Pilgrims were Puritans, so
Yeah.
they were, more Protestant than the Anglican Church. So they might have had a Book of Common Prayer with them, but they were also kind of fleeing the conformity of the Anglican Church. They certainly would have had the Geneva Bible, which was the most Protestant of the mainstream translations of the Bible during this period.
Fantastic. All right,
So-
Harold, we have a bunch of people with hands.
Yes, we do. And I would just point out that the Book of Common Prayer with the Psalter is used to this day. I have several copies.
Absolutely.
And I have done it. A friend of mine gave me, this was the 1660 version that an Episcopal friend gave me. Anyway, Ira. Oh, excuse me. No. Sarah was first. Sarah Sloan, and then Ira, and then Sherry.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I was particularly intrigued when you said that women did many of the translations. Could you speak a little bit more about that point?
Yeah, well, that's really interested me. And I think there's been a lot of interesting feminist scholarship about women in the Psalms during this period. Women were not encouraged in general to write poetry or to publish, but they were encouraged to be meditative and to participate in prayer practices. And so many of these exist only in manuscript form because publishing was considered to be kind of immodest, even for aristocrats, weren't supposed to really publish under their own names. And women certainly weren't expected to publish, but Anne Locke did actually publish her Psalms, although I think they were anonymous. So there's a lot of manuscripts that exist, usually not the whole Psalter, usually it's the penitential Psalms or other selected Psalms that speak to the person, but it really resembles our offerings practiced here because these are free verse translations. Sometimes they're prose paraphrases. With the Anne Locke, she does 21 sonnets on one psalm. So she's really just kind of going into each image and expanding that. And, it's a kind of a writing, but it's also clearly a kind of a spiritual exercise. So there was just opportunity there for women to explore language and to explore spirituality through translation projects.
Thank you. That was
Ira?
really interesting.
Was fast. Ira?
Yes, thank you so much, Julia. That was really wonderful, and everyone else who read. So I don't know a whole lot about Shakespeare in terms of his bio or his life. Would he have been somebody who would have been reading Psalms on a daily basis? How devout was he? And do you think that these correlations that you were making between the Psalms and the Tempest were something conscious on Shakespeare's part, or just some sort of subliminal seeping in of all this imagery that he used in his plays?
Okay, well, the first question is about his own practice. And, we don't know, but I think it's unlikely that he was a super devout Christian. I think he was probably, he was he was a member of the Anglican Church. His family may have been kind of crypto-Catholic. There's a lot of debate about that. But he was certainly steeped in the Bible as everyone was during this period. And in terms of the second question about conscious or more subliminal. Subliminal is the safer answer to that. I think the Book of Jonah is more prominent as a conscious model for the Tempest. And of course, the Book of Jonah does have a psalm in it. It's not one of the Tehillim, but it is a psalm of thanksgiving, which you can see very direct correlations between that poem and Ariel's psalm. But I didn't want to get too deep into the relationship between Jonah and the Psalms. So I think he's definitely has the Book of Jonah in mind. And I think it's very likely he has Psalm 107 in mind, because this is actually included in the Book of Common Prayer in a special appendix, Psalms to be said at sea by sailors during a shipwreck. So this psalm had a lot of resonance and power in the period around these shipwreck and storm and tempest issues. The phrase fresh springs is in the play in association with Caliban. So I think that Shakespeare is thinking about both the tempest imagery and the imagery of merciful fresh water, rain. That dialectic is a psalmic dialectic, and it's certainly, part of the rhythm of the play. Subliminal or conscious, I mean, he's a poet. Those of you, all of you are poets now through these offerings, and you know that something comes to you and it becomes poetry, and it comes to you from all these multiple inputs and sources, and then you shape it. And I think we see that with Shakespeare.
Thank you.
I'm looking in my Book of Common Prayer. Psalm 66 is in that section. Forms of prayer to be used at sea, Thanksgiving after a storm. You say Psalm 66 or Psalm 107.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sherry.
It's actually me. Thank you, Julia, for this wonderful presentation. I want to expand on a question that Ira brought up, that it was clear that Shakespeare was familiar with all of this, but my question would be, do you see more specific linkages between psalmic passages and things in either The Tempest or in Shakespeare more generally, where he might have picked phrases or whole verses and things like that? Or is it just more a general thing?
I think fresh springs is a specific phrase. There are a lot of phrases. There's so many that they're hard to even tabulate. So I'm more interested in the imagery and the themes, and then these kind of narrative and psychological rhythms. But if you get a good edition of Shakespeare in Arden or a Cambridge or an Oxford, they'll often point out, see Psalm X, and it will be a very specific phrase or word choice. And then you have to get into, well, is it Coverdale? What Psalm edition would you track down that reference? And there's a lot of debate about that. I chose the Coverdale because a lot of it does end up getting recycled into the King James Bible, and it's actually a really good translation. But there's also all these singing versions, and so it becomes quite complicated, because Shakespeare would have heard the sung versions as well, and they're in this kind of awkward meter, very kind of sing-song meter, but they would have been part of his whole audio environment. So it's just, there's so much of it that sorting it out is, it's what dissertations do.
Okay, but you said that people have done that.
Yes, there are. Yeah. And so, that nice article that that somebody sent around about Hamlet and Psalm 51 would be an example of somebody really working through a specific psalm and some of the translations and themes and all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Dean Dresser.
Oh, I just wanted to really, really thank you. And I wanted to mention, I was interested in, I think it's fascinating to me that the Psalters were translated into illuminated manuscripts also much earlier, I have ones in the 800s. And that the monastic orders, like in Ethiopia, they said there, when they entered the order, they had to say the 150 Psalms every day. So we all know, the Gregorian chants. So I would think that that would have been flowing around as a common known factor for Shakespeare and also his audience. So I was wondering if, anyway, that was what I was thinking about, like, who he was writing these plays for.
That's fascinating. I mean, I need to learn more about the use of the Psalms in all of these prayer practices before the Reformation. And I mean, they're clearly very much, written into meditative practices in Catholic Europe. And so that's really fascinating. There's a comment here from Hazan Naomi Hirsch about Pericles, which is one of my favorite plays, and I think it's very psalmic, and it's certainly another play that's very closely modeled on the Book of Jonah. So before Shakespeare wrote The Tempest, he wrote Pericles. Actually, he co-wrote Pericles, and many of the Tempest themes and issues are kind of worked out first in that play and then become more perfect in The Tempest, which is one of his very last plays.
Well, Julia,
Are you teaching any courses or any that congregants at CBST could sign up for?
Well, I am going to be hosting a series on Shakespeare and Psalms in the spring, starting in April.
Wow.
And I'll be doing a little bit of the teaching and learning, but we're also bringing in some guests. And I'm very happy that Robert Alter has agreed to give one of the talks. So I'd love to share that information with you.
That would be fantastic. If you would share that with us, we would love it. This is fantastic. Is there anything to be said more about the sonnets and Psalms? Do we know anything about?
Well, that's a really great area. There are certainly echoes of Psalms throughout the sonnets. The sonnets tend to be read kind of as a novel about Shakespeare and a young man and a dark lady. And my collaborator, Sean Kylan, and I, who are both going to be co-hosting the Shakespeare and Psalms project in the spring, we're really interested in separating Shakespeare's sonnets from that narrative a little bit. And one way to do that is to think about the psalmic contexts and models for the sonnets. And the themes of again, memory and forgiveness. My friend Vivian has beautiful thoughts about I think it's sonnet 62, sweet sessions of remembrance of things past, that wonderful sonnet. So I think we can think of, and then of course the Psalms were considered as a narrative about David. So you have this interesting, as we explored in that wonderful Havruta on the penitential Psalm 51, you can go into these things both as narrative, biographical, autobiographical, and you can go into them as addressed more generally to different situations for the.
Julia, you froze. Yeah. Oh no.
Oh no.
Well, while we wait for Julia to come back, we are towards the end of the class. Rabbi, can I do a minute of housekeeping?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe Julia
So,
let's just write to Julia that she's
right.
frozen.
Absolutely. Today is Thursday, so there is no class tomorrow. Next week, there are classes on Monday and Thursday, no classes on Tuesday and Wednesday because of the holidays. On Monday, we will be returning to the big read. We will complete the big read that we've been doing over the past year and a half with Psalms 140 through 149. And I will be distributing a little sign-up information because we need Hebrew readers and English readers. That will be most of the class on Monday. And then on Thursday, we will be completing the class by studying Psalm 150, the last Psalm in the book of Psalms. This Friday's service tomorrow night.
Both classes will be an hour long. We'll do it. So we might get to 150 a little bit on Monday. We'll see.
And the service tomorrow will have a flavor of Psalms to it. So please, if you can come in person, come in person. If not, stream the service tomorrow. Rabbi?
Yeah, so yes, tomorrow night service will be we'll incorporate really a celebration of the journey of this group, of this class. So we're hoping to have different things in the service, elements that will reflect the 18 months we've spent together. And then Rabbi Moskowitz's class, I think it's October 18th it will begin. And he really wanted me to encourage people not to be afraid, and he will go at whatever pace it takes. And it's okay if you have to miss a class, don't worry, it'll be recorded. But he really wants you to not be afraid of him. So I promised him I would tell people not to be afraid. All new journeys, we say in Hebrew, kol hadchalot kashot, all new things are difficult, but often they bring us great rewards. So yes, an hour class next week will be from 10 to 11 on Monday and Thursday. And we'll also talk a little bit about how to continue with our own personal Psalm study and engagement, and how to make it part of your life. So I think that's it, right, Harold?
Wait, no, there's one thing I wanted to say.
Oh, Judy,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I had interviewed a number of people, and I'm going to interview people a second time. And if anybody wants to be interviewed, still time. There's people I said I would and didn't. It's not I'm irresponsible. I'm just human. But I posted a summary, sort of a draft of what I found out. It's on the Facebook page. So, and if anybody has any comments, and I don't mean yay, good job, but if you have some constructive ways that I can make this better or more, get the point across better. I'm also going to blog it on Times of Israel, so it'll get us out. This will be advertised.
Great, and we'll figure out where we could put it in the CBST universe.
Well, read it first. But
And
I
Harold,
really would appreciate some
we're gonna have
feedback.
all the offerings somewhere on the website, right?
Yes, we will be linking to the offerings probably from the Psalms page website. I have to work that out with our IT people.
I love the way that sounds so official, like we have IT people. Okay.
All right.
Well, I don't know that Julia's been able to get back, so please put your thank yous to her in the chat. We'll make sure she'll get the
And I will
chat
send her the
in
chat.
writing. So please put anything down, because I don't think she was able to get back to us. So please put things in the chat. We'll get her the chat. And the room will stay open just till 11 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. That was fantastic, really exciting, very, very stimulating and moving. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye, Rabbi.
See you at Shul tomorrow night.
Oh, yes.